Hello everyone and welcome to the Midweek show here on RaceWeek. Now just want to say this is my first time doing it this way. You may notice a difference in audio quality. That's because I am back at uni now and I haven't quite managed to get my PC here yet. But I don't know how this is going to do. I'm having to do this in a completely different way to before. So if there are any potential technical problems, then please bear with us that there might be some technical problems. But today it is the RaceWeek show where I will be discussing events of last weekend's Tuscan Grand Prix and as well as many other news throughout the racing world, particularly in the fact that there is the Le Mans 24 Hours coming up this weekend, which I'll be reviewing a little bit next week in the next week's show. But before I go into the news, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter. Also, stay tuned for the RaceWeek website, which will be coming up, which will be live next week. And now, let's go in to the news. First up, it's the Mugello circuit. Drivers, after an action-packed weekend, drivers have been very vocal in their praise of this circuit. They want to go back here next year, and I honestly agree with them, to be honest. I think Mugello was a nice bit of fresh air. It was also a very old-school track as well, because with like grass and gravel, rather than tarmac runoff roads. And I think that is why the drivers really like the circuit. Something that a lot of people have been talking about on social media is how maybe going forward we should have a wild card race each year, which could go to different tracks. And I think that's what's needed, to be honest, because I think there needs to be some variety on the Formula One calendar, to be honest, because it's getting very samey each year, and I think everyone will probably welcome quite a bit of variety. I mean, I honestly personally think that a great idea would be to have, for example, maybe 18 to 20 races each year, and then have a few of the rounds changed around quite a bit. That probably won't happen, but that could be a good idea going forward. And secondly, there was quite a lot of controversy over the FIA's initial decision to investigate Lewis Hamilton for the shirt that he wore on the podium and also in the end racism segment for the Tuscan Grand Prix, which as you can read, he was obviously protesting the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. And I think it's really good that Lewis Hamilton is using his platform to speak out. And I am totally for the way that he is doing. I have so much respect for the way that, because I mean, this year Lewis is not just proving to be an incredible driver. He's proving to be an incredible person as well. And he has been very vocal about this whole Black Lives Matter segment. And had the FIA, because the FIA then withdrew their investigation. I think had the FIA actually done an investigation and taken action, they'd have really shot themselves in the foot. Because, especially considering they are obviously have been trying really hard to push the end racism and raise awareness to Black Lives Matter. So had they done anything to Lewis about the shirt that he wore, then that would have kind of gone against what they have been already doing a great job to achieve. But thankfully there was no investigation, and Lewis got a lot of praise for what he did, and understandably so. The third bit of news I'm going to be mentioning is the price for a new team is now at $200 million. So essentially, this is not good for those who are waiting to see a new team in Formula One. but the price of a new team has increased to $200 million, which a lot of that goes to the existing teams. And bearing in mind this goes on top of what they already have to spend, I mean, this has received very mixed views across the motorsport community, but even the aspiring team, which it affects quite, because Panther Grand Prix have spoken out about this, and they have stated that as much as it makes things harder for them, they stated that it separates the good teams, the good teams from the teams that simply aren't cut out to run an F1 squad. And also we saw the IndyCar series. I haven't mentioned this series much on RaceWeek in the past few episodes, but the IndyCar series is still in full swing. And last weekend we saw the series headed to Mid-Ohio, and the first race saw Will Power take victory, and in the second race we saw Colton Herta take his third Grand Prix victory. It wasn't a good weekend for the championship leader though. Scott Dixon scored 2 10th places. In the second race he actually had a spin which dropped him down the order. He still leads the table by 72 points, I believe it is, if my maths are correct, ahead of Joseph Newgart in second and Pato O'Ward in third. But it wasn't his best weekend in what until then had been quite a firmly dominated season by Scott Dixon. But that is the news, and now I'm going to go into, and now there is a little bit of analysis that I need to do, and of course the analysis is going to be about that restart incident. And of course, there is a reason why I am analysing this incident specifically, because there's been so much talk about it as to who was at fault, because it's not really clear who was who was at fault. So I am going to try to decode what exactly happened. So firstly, I am going to be looking at it from Carlos Sainz's onboard. So this is onboard with him. As you can see, he can't really see much, and bearing in mind the onboard is a much higher camera rather than lower down in the car, which is what the driver sees from lower down. All he can see is basically the rear wings of the cars immediately in front of him. So, and those cars went. So from his point of view, he thought the field had gone. However, that turned out not to be the case, and that is why he was so caught out. He thought the field had gone, but then he went, and then he found a couple of much slower cars in the way, and he could do nothing. Thank God for the halo, by the way, because actually these stills really show how without the halo, Giovinazzi's car could have come quite close to Sainz's head, and also how close Giovinazzi went to going over. And this is from Kevin Magnussen's point of view, and this is actually a fairly interesting point of view, because he is behind the two Williams. I believe that's Latifi ahead of him. Actually, I think that's Russell ahead of him. As you can see, George Russell ahead is going fast, but then he has to slam onto the brakes, because then the field in front slowed down, were a lot slower than he thought they were going, and then he was rear-ended from behind, and he was basically an innocent bystander in that crash, was Kevin Magnussen. Now look at it from Giovinazzi's point of view. As you can see, he is behind Nicholas Latifi in the other Williams, and as you can see, he is kind of unsighted, and then he smashes into the back of the Haas of Magnussen, which then ricochets him into Latifi, putting all three of them out of the race. Giovinazzi had quite a nasty ride in it all. But this is the most interesting bit, because a lot of people are saying George Russell left quite a gap. Now, I'm not saying that George Russell is to blame here. Pretty much most drivers want to do that. Did that because they're obviously wanting to warm their tyres. And obviously what George's intention was, he slowed down to warm his tyres, and then he caught back up to the rest of the pack. But the drivers behind And you can see why this happened, and maybe it's the rules. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute as to maybe what could be done to prevent this, because I'm not saying that George should be penalised in any way for this, because he basically did what a lot of drivers do, and usually that doesn't result in much of a problem. But he would have been slowing down to warm up his tyres, and then he sped up to catch back up to the rest of the pack. But obviously the drivers behind misinterpreted that as him going for the restart. And then because they could not see that much in front of him, they assumed the whole field had gone. And then that may have led to the incident. Now, I'm not saying that George Russell was at fault, as I said, but I honestly think maybe the rules should state, maybe the rules could possibly be changed a little bit. So maybe the drivers are, as they get closer to the safety car line, the distance that the driver has to be within the car in front decreases maybe, rather than, and maybe prevents drivers from being allowed to drop back that far. Because usually this sort of thing does not result in an incident. I mean, this sort of thing happens on most restarts, drivers warming up their tyres, leaving a gap, and then speeding up to catch up just before the line. It's just in this instance, it caught a few drivers out. I mean, the other thing is, should the safety car line have been before the final corner? Maybe. I mean, that's debatable, because whilst obviously this incident happened in F1, but there were safety car restarts in the junior formula with less experienced drivers, and they all managed them well. There were no incidents like that on the restart. So, yes, it could be a combination of a track, and maybe the way to prevent this is there could maybe be a rule that drivers have to stay within a certain distance of the car ahead as they approach. I mean, they already have that rule, but maybe that rule, I believe it's like a 10 car length rule, but maybe that distance could decrease as for maybe the last lap before for when like the safety car's announced to be coming in, or something like that. Of course, the late call to restart did not help this situation, but I don't really think there was any single driver to blame, although 12 drivers did get warned for their inconsistent throttle application on the restart. But that is my take on what happened. So, now let's talk about the season, where things currently stand in this 2020 season. So, going into what was a very interesting Tuscan Grand Prix, going after the race, the drivers' standings are Lewis Hamilton currently leads the standings by 55 points, back to Valtteri Bottas in second. Max Verstappen is currently doubting his title chances right now. He's in third, ahead of Lando Norris, who's now back up into fourth. Then you have Alex Albon in fifth, Lance Stroll in sixth, Daniel Ricciardo, who's had a really good run recently, in seventh, Charles Leclerc in eighth, Sergio Perez in ninth, and Pierre Gasly in 10th. And then if you look at the constructors' standings, Mercedes currently have a massive lead. They are on 325 points, back to Red Bull in second. McLaren are currently in third on 106 points. They're having a very good season at the moment, ahead of Racing Point in fourth. Renault are in fifth, ahead of Ferrari in sixth. They are falling into the clutches of AlphaTauri in seventh. Then you have Alfa Romeo in eighth, with Haas in ninth, and Williams currently the only team on the starting block. Now, Williams will be very frustrated, because the other thing is, had George Russell got that point, Williams on countback would actually have moved ahead of Haas in the constructors' standings due to the countback. That's something interesting to note. But talking about where we stand, obviously Lewis Hamilton is in true command and looks really on to take a 7th world title right now. I mean, of course, things can change, but we're just over halfway through this 2020 season, and Lewis Hamilton has one of the biggest leads in the standings he's ever had at this stage of the season. I mean, it's just gone so well for him. Valtteri Bottas, he's just been unable to keep up with his teammate as much as he did last year. Last year, he did pose a bit of a challenge, but has not been able to keep up. Max Verstappen is starting to doubt his title chances in third now after two DNFs in a row, which has obviously not helped his title chances going forward. But I mean, he's actually stated he thinks he was never really in it, considering the Mercedes advantage. Then you have Lando Norris in fourth. He's been very consistent at Alex this year, and he's in fourth. Then you have Alex Albon. That podium is going to be a massive confidence boost going forward. In 5th place, that is going to really help his confidence and maybe spur him on to improve. Then in 6th place you have Lance Stroll, who is proving to be improving quite a lot. I mean, the thing about Lance Stroll, I have to say about him, I think this year he is proving to be worthy of being in Formula 1. There was a lot of question marks about him in his first 3 years in Formula 1. But you have to remember, he dominated the FIA Formula 3 series in 2016 in quite a stacked field of that as well. So maybe, I personally think, because in 2017, he had a few good races. When he was on his day, he was very fast. It was just those days weren't that frequent. And the same could be said with 2018 and 2019, but now he's in a good car. In 2020, I think he is proving himself to be worthy. Maybe what could be said is maybe he was just promoted to F1 too early, and he maybe could have done with a couple of years in Formula 2. But because maybe he'd be looking, his career would have been held in quite high regard had he gone into F2 for a couple of seasons than being thrust into the deep end. Daniel Ricciardo's having a really good run right now, on a really good run of results in 7th, ahead of Charles Leclerc, who, despite being down in 8th, is, to be honest, getting the maximum out of that Ferrari that is possible. Like, he is doing an incredible job. Sergio Perez has been quite obviously very unlucky with missing a couple of races. Pierre Gasly rounding out the top 10 in what's a very interesting battle at the back end of the top 10. So it's been an it's with 8 races to go, you could say it is looking good for Lewis Hamilton. So we now talk about the Formula 2 series and where we currently stand with that. And that saw a fascinating weekend last weekend, which saw Mick Schumacher take the lead. He didn't show the best pace, as good pace that weekend as he did in Monza, but he kept his nose clean and was able to get himself into the lead of the standings after both his championship rivals had difficult weekends. Callum Eilert, I believe, only scored like 3 points in the sprint race after dropping down the order in the feature race. He's currently in second, ahead of Christian Lundgaard, who had a very solid weekend, in third in the standings. Robert Schwartzman had a very unlucky showing in Mugello. He qualified better than he has, despite another yellow flag affecting his qualifying, and was sitting quite well on the alternate strategy before his car let him down in the first race, and considering that he was the first, that meant he had to start dead last in race 2 as well. it was going to be hard to recover from that. Nikita Mazepin taking another win in race 1 ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in 6th, who is kind of falling down the order after a couple of bad weekends. And you have Louis Delatrez, Guan Yu Zhou once again. Guan Yu Zhou, I think, would be, I'm pretty certain, is being restrained by a lot of bad luck. He would be in title contention, even had he got that win alone that he lost in Austria, would put him quite a lot higher in the standings than he is right now. Then you have Luca Giotto in 9th and Felipe Drugovich in 10th. There are rumours that potentially there could be 3 Ferrari Driver Academy seats available at Alfa Romeo, potentially Alfa Romeo and Haas, considering that both those teams, there is speculation as to what's going to happen. So there is so much at stake for the top 3 Ferrari Driver Academies. And finally, we need to talk about the Formula 3 race series that came to a close last weekend and saw Oscar Piastri. I'll be doing a more in-depth review of the 2020 Formula 3 season in due course. Stay tuned for that. But the Formula 3 race, it was a very close title battle, which looked like it was between Piastri and Sargent going into the final race. Oscar Piastri and Logan Sargent. And they were level on points going into the last race. Piastri still led on countback. Théo Pourchaire closed the gap to 9 points, but it looked like it was going to be just between the leading 2. But then Logan Sargent got taken out on the first lap of the second race, which meant his title was over. People would think that meant championship over. Not according to Théo Pourchaire, who threw everything at it, but he could not quite manage. And Oscar Piastri got the points he needed to take title glory by just 3 points back to Théo Pourchaire in second. Logan Sargent had an incredible run, and he can be very proud of how he did this season, but he would have been disappointed to end up in third. Frederic Vesti won the first race on Saturday and finished in 4th in the standings. He had a very solid end to the year. Then you had Liam Lawson, who won the second race on Sunday, the final race of the season. Then you had David Beckman 6th, Jake Hughes 7th, Tharim Zendelli 8th, Richard Bashaw in 9th, and Alex Peroni in 10th. As I said, I will be doing an more in-depth review of the F3 standings in due course, which will be on this YouTube channel. So that is almost it from this week's midweek recap. But to finish things off, let's go in to the RaceWeek Moments of the Week. And in 5th place, we have 3 races in 1. I believe it's the first time since the 1987 Austrian Grand Prix where we saw 3 standing starts in one day. But that is what made this Tuscan Grand Prix really unique. 2 red flags, and then you had the rules necessitating a standing restart after a red flag. So that was very good to see. I like this rule. I believe this rule came in 2018 and they were rehearsing for it in pre-season testing. But it hasn't been in action until now. And standing restarts after a safety car would be too excessive. But having this rare instance in a red flag where you could get another standing start mid-race, I think works. At number 4, we have Alex Albon finally taking his maiden podium in Formula One. And I'm pretty sure pretty much everyone was happy to see that, because people have been rooting for him, and he came so close on a couple of occasions and lost out literally just a few laps from it. But finally he has managed to do it, and as I said earlier, could this spur him on to be more consistently quick going forward compared to his teammate Max Verstappen? Could that spur him on? At number 3, we have Oscar Piastri winning the Formula 3 title. The first champion crowned on the F1 in terms of the F1 Junior Series, Bill. And Oscar Piastri, I believe, was a deserving champion. In a really close fight, he came out on top and did what he needed. And I believe he is getting a lot of attention in Australia now, and rightfully so, considering that he now has put himself in line to be Australia's next star. I'm assuming that he will be moving up into Formula 2 next year, and it will be interesting to see how he does there. At number 2, we have Lewis Hamilton's statement. Now, this may seem a little bit controversial to some, but I have always said I am fully for drivers speaking out about important topics. And Lewis Hamilton, I have so much respect for the way that he is raising awareness. I think he is not just the best being the best in the sport at raising awareness to this important matter, but one of the best in the world. He has been very vocal about this whole Black Lives Matter thing, and rightfully so. You can see his passion for the subject, and I really respect him for using this platform to make his statements, and I hope he continues to do so, because this is an important topic, and it can't just, as he says, this is an important topic, and they can't just stop after a bit. They can't stop until they actually make a difference and eradicate racism in some way. At number 1, I have the big talking point of the weekend, which is hence why it is at number 1, which was the restart carnage. And this obviously was seen as the most notable moment of the race, which obviously I have discussed what happened, analysed it, but thankfully everyone was okay in this incident. It could have been very nasty indeed, but let's hope that the FIA takes action so we don't see incidents like this in the future going forward. So that is it from the midweek show. Be sure to stay tuned on this channel for more content, such as an F1 2020 driver lineup prediction, and also sometime soon I will be doing a Formula 3 season review. And of course, make sure you stay tuned for the launch of the new RaceWeek site next week in the build-up to the Russian Grand Prix. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, follow RaceWeek on Twitter, and we will see you in the next week. As far as live streams are concerned, we'll see you next week for the midweek recap, where we will preview the Russian Grand Prix. Goodbye.